On episode 130 of the Vincast, I'm joined by Dan Pannell, who runs cult Pemberton winery Picardy. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first episode of the Vincast for 2018. My name is James Garsbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and I couldn't be more excited for you to join me for the first episode of the year. Very, very excited to have a number of amazing guests this year, hopefully with a certain amount of regularity, which probably requires me to do a little preparation, particularly around harvest time, because I'll be busy making my third vintage of Vino Intrepido. Let me know if you've seen the Vino Intrepido wines out and about in your wine discoveries. But yeah, I'm really excited to also hopefully have a number of live recordings of the podcast. If you didn't hear it or see it on the Facebook Live or the Intrepid Wino Facebook page, the first edition of the Vincast Live was held in early December last year, and I was joined by a couple of former guests, and hopefully I'll have many more this year. I'm looking forward to uploading the audio recording of that edition and hearing what you think of it, and hopefully having many of you attend some of the live recordings. But this is an episode for the first one for 2018. I actually recorded several months ago whilst my guest was here in Melbourne, Dan Pannell of the famous wine family, the Pannell family, who Dan's parents established Mosswood in Margaret River very much in the early days, was one of the pioneers of Margaret River, but has subsequently sold Mosswood and now has been for over 20 years, been running Picardy in Pemberton, also in Western Australia. So Dan was very, very generous in donating some time whilst he was here in Melbourne to chat about his life and his background and the story of Picardy. So I hope you do enjoy the episode. Please stick around to the end to find out how to get in contact with us, to let us know if you enjoyed it. But until then, I'll see you on the other side. Dan Pannell, you are here in Melbourne after a huge Pinot Palooza, no doubt, and you've been able to set aside a little bit of time for us to sit down and chat here on the Vincast. Thank you very much for being on the show.
No worries. Thanks for having us.
Dan, I start every episode by asking my guest if they can remember the first kind of interaction that they had with wine they can remember that made them think about it in a different way and set them on the path to following a career in wine.
That's hard for me, seeing I grew up in it from such an early age with Dad starting Mosswood.
So it was a gradual osmosis, or what's your earliest memory of understanding? Oh, this is what wine is, or this is what our family business is.
Oh, I think from probably 3 or 5 years old, I understood what we were about and the work Dad and Mum put into the property and us running around as kids out there and all of that. But certainly there were stages of life where you get a better appreciation of what it's for. I mean, okay, I was probably a fair bit older. I would have been probably early 30s, and the first time I happened to get into Chablis, into one of their dirty, dark cellars, and it's almost, for a first timer, they're tears in the eye sort of feeling, and shit, this is amazing stuff, and it just reinvigorates your passion for what you do when you happen to walk into those situations. And during my life, obviously, very fortunate when Dad and Mum sold Mosswood in the mid-80s that it was 82 and 83 Burgundies and Bordeaux were for sale, so Dad filled his cellar with those wines. So I more or less grew up drinking those. So it sort of stuffed my palate up for big Aussie styles, but that's what I grew up drinking, and very fortunately so. And so my palate is certainly more pushed towards that European finesse, elegance, complexity rather than bigness of wine.
Were you born in Margaret River?
I was born in Perth originally, but we moved to Busselton pretty much when I was 1 or 2 years old. Dad had bought the land at Mosswood. So,
what was it like growing up on not only, a vineyard, but arguably one of the most important vineyards in the region, I believe it was the first commercial vineyard in the region.
It was actually second behind Bass Felix.
Right, okay.
Yeah, Tom Cullity was first with that, and then Dad with Mosswood. And we actually grew up in Bustleton near the beach, so lifestyle choices was as good as you can get back in the 70s in Bustleton. But the property, we were out there a lot, and it was vacant land. And I remember, Dad trying to do things and, having to drive a couple of hours over to Donnybrook because there wasn't much farming implement stuff in Bustleton, Margaret River then, so you had to go to the older farming areas, which were a bit more inland. Trying to source winemaking equipment, making cement tanks out of new sewage cement tanks and lining them with wax every year. And it was pretty hardcore. And the old man was a really hard worker and quite inventive in ways of getting things done, and an avid reader. So, I think, it worked, but it was a lot of work to get there, for sure.
Were you expected to sort of help out with the family business as well from a relatively young age?
Yeah, all four of us had to go out there when we, after school or on weekends and school holidays and help out. And, we ran around not necessarily helping all the time, but, I think the four of us actually quite enjoyed it as well, because it was a different lifestyle, but it was good fun, and we all hung out together a fair bit.
Did you each kind of have particular parts of the business, the process of wine that you connected with, or did you just sort of enjoy everything?
Not really. We all did everything, and I think all of us actually hated it, being honest, as kids. Okay. By the time they sold it, we were all sick of it, and so we were certainly never going to really follow on. And my older brother's in it, and I'm in it, and my younger sister's married to a winemaker. So it's worked out that way. But you look back now, and it wasn't that bad. But at the time, we had other things in our lives as kids, not wanting to be there. So,
were you encouraged to taste wine when you were still relatively young?
Yeah, we always had wine on the table in Bustleton, and certainly if Mum and Dad opened good bottles, we were encouraged to taste it. Champagne was the big one, I suppose. We all hooked into that as kids, and the old Laurent Perrier when it was $7.99 a bottle.
Goodness gracious, I can't even imagine that.
Yeah, it was around and available, and still a very good wine back then as well.
But sort of, especially as a teenager, did you have any particular other interests that you thought about maybe following a career outside of the wine industry?
Oh, yes and no. I mean, I was mainly into horse riding and windsurfing and surfing, so more individual sports. So it was never for me going to be a career. That was just sport. But towards the end of school, I was actually more into accounting and business management.
Really?
Yeah, started a degree in that, but once again, too much surfing and water skiing at the time, so didn't end up completing that. But it's been very useful running the business, having done that as well. Then I went into pubs and bottle shops and ended up managing pubs and bottle shops and working my way around Australia a bit doing that. And then one day just had enough of that and rang Mum and Dad and said, I'm going to Roseworthy.
Right, okay. How old were you when your parents sold Mosswood?
About 17, I think.
Okay. Yeah. And how developed was the region at that point? Was there a lot more kind of interest, or was it still growing?
It was still prior to its sort of major growth phase. I think that happened more in the...
Because that was around about when Kate Mantell got back-to-back Jimmy Watson trophies, didn't it?
Oh, that was a bit earlier, again. But I think the real exponential phase of Margaret River was in the mid-90s when we got all the tax breaks on planting, which I think actually stuffed our industry. So as soon as you get government intervention in like that in a business, I think, it all went too far.
So working in pubs and bottle shops, that probably would have given you an interesting grounding in terms of the trade and also with the end consumers. Was that an interesting experience? And what were people drinking when you were working in that part of the industry?
I worked in a few pubs, especially over here, and it was a bit of a shock for me originally because when they asked for a glass of wine, they meant to pour it out of a 4-litre bag and box. But, so that side, the pub side was all good fun at the time, but not really helpful for where I'm at now. But certainly the retail side, getting to see a lot of other wines, getting to see customer choices and, learning about how to handle and work with customers. I find that still very handy for this side of what I'm doing. But I'd have to say nowadays I'm sort of happier back at house.
Beyond the experience you had at home, tasting widely, the chance to be, particularly in Melbourne, in wine retail, you would have been exposed to quite a good range of different wines, both from Australia and overseas.
Yeah, I mean, back then it was still pretty small over here. Even I found, there were a few, like every state, there were a few good wine stores, but not a lot. We're talking late 80s now, so there was a good range of wine, but it still was nothing compared to what we see today. You had to know who to buy from and where and when it was coming in and things like that. But certainly now you can walk into just about any bottle shop and have a good range of quality wine and quality imports as well, and people with knowledge selling them to you. I mean, if you look even back to early 90s in WA, we had pretty much no sommeliers, and we had probably 2 good retailers who really knew their stuff. And now we've got a sommelier in just about every restaurant that sells wine, and probably 20 to 30 really top-end retailers in WA.
Yeah.
So I think that's been a major advancement for Australia. In WA we've got this guy Dan Wagner who was in Sydney before, and his knowledge is incredible. And then we've got, just right behind him, some amazing somms over there. And to think with only 15 years ago we had no one. So yeah, I think the industry's really had a good shake-up, and even Pinot Palooza on the weekend, looking at the way the party atmosphere works, and people are seeing wine as more an enjoyable thing rather than a toffee thing to drink at a table of toffee people. It's really brought it down to earth and open to everyone and accessible.
I think it's a bit different to perhaps, back when you were working at pubs and people just wanted booze in their glass, they didn't care if it came from Chateau Cardboard. The people, even though they are drinking and they're having fun and it's a party atmosphere, they still care about what they're drinking, and potentially they're caring about where the product comes from, how it's grown, how it's made, that kind of thing. So I think that's probably a really exciting thing to be happening in the industry.
Well, and that's, you're exactly right. The blending of the enjoyment factor of wine and the knowledge of wine. They're not segregated anymore. And certainly on the weekend, we were people asking about clones and growing techniques, winemaking techniques, and they really want to know what you do. It's not just I've got a glass of wine in front of me and I'm drinking it because it's got alcohol in it.
At the end of the day, as long as people are sort of saying if they like it or not, that's great. But if they're engaging enough that they kind of want to take away a couple of key pieces of information, that's fantastic.
Yep.
Hopefully they don't wipe it out, later on, and next morning they wake up and go, "Was I at a wine event?"
Yeah, I think then you meet the Japanese way of doing things, where they have to know everything.
Yeah, it's very clinical.
Everything. Yeah, but the knowledge base is incredible, and I think we are on some small steps in that direction. People want to know what they're drinking, and really into their varietals and the styles of within those varietals, and regionality and all that. They really want to know how it's done and why it is what it is in the glass in front of them.
Yeah, exactly. When you made the decision to go to Roseworthy, was that sort of saying, right, I better kind of, get out there and get a proper job, or did you kind of say, no, actually wine is something I really want to get into working in?
I think it's a bit of both. I'm a strong believer, and still the same, having travelled a lot more, that Australian hospitality is extremely underrated and underappreciated. the pay in top hotels, restaurants, motels, even managers within premium hotels in Australia is minuscule compared to even friends I've got in Asia managing hotels who, on good money and serious about what they do. So it was partly that pushed me, because I could see no defined lifetime income from that end of the industry.
Yeah.
It's probably better now. As I said, there's professionals in that side of the industry. But I think certainly my passion for wine had grown. It gave me a direction. I was very fortunate to go to I was the last of the old Roseworthy out at Roseworthy College. So I think it was more a very hands-on course rather than a general sciences course with a bit of a winery top-up feel.
Right.
So I call it more of a TAFE learning, very hands-on.
Yep.
Very wine and vineyard specific, very little general sciences.
Sure. And some of the people you studied with?
Oh, Dave Bicknell. I mean, look, just won winemaker of the year.
Yep.
Great guy, and always had the feeling he was a great winemaker. And
Makes a good Chardonnay.
Still rate him as a good friend.
Right.
He's a really good guy. His wife Nikki was there as well. Lovely person, great Vigneron. Steve Flamstead, once again, great guy, making some great wines over here as well. So, I think I was very fortunate. I went through with a really good crew of people that were very passionate, mature age students, knew what we wanted to achieve, and got in and did it. So some great people.
Having grown up, in the vineyard and the winery, and with as far as your parents with Mosswood, did that give you much of a leg up when you went to Roseworthy?
Yes and no. It helped me understand the things we were doing, but I didn't necessarily know the science or why we were doing them.
Sure.
So this gave me the backup knowledge of why I was watching Dad do what he was doing when I was a kid. So, it gave me the leg up that way, in that I knew that you do these things and, you had outcomes from them, but I didn't get the science behind it. And so learning that base knowledge underneath it was certainly very handy, and it was helpful to sort of keep my knowledge level up, like push me through a bit easier than it would have been otherwise if I hadn't done that, I suppose.
Do you think that that's a fundamental thing that's missing from a lot of wine producers, is that it's the understanding, it's study and kind of work out what the science behind it is, but not necessarily use that knowledge to change or to push a wine into a direction that it possibly doesn't need to be? Because I think that there's a lot of wine in Australia that are at the two extremes. There's a lot of wine that's made with little understanding of the science around it, and then there's ones that it's all about the numbers. Yeah,
I mean, there's so much in that question. I'm anti-tannin additions, and I'm not a natural winemaker, but I really am not into winery-made wine.
Yep.
I'm into growing bloody good grapes and then turning it into good wine.
Exactly.
I'm not big on winery manipulation at all. I think then you've got this new natural. Well, it's not that new at the moment, but the natural wine thing, and I truly believe that it's a good thing. I think there's still a lot of rubbish wine coming out under the natural brand.
Sure.
But if you look at the old world, I've been very fortunate in WA. We've got this little wine bar called No Mafia, and the lady running it, Emma, has this amazing knowledge of these wines from Italy, and they're natural wines, most of them. And she just blows my mind with the quality of these things. They don't have to be dirty and funky and ugly. They just can be a great wine, but made with less addition.
Yeah.
And, I think in this country, we're almost deliberately making some faulty wines to call them natural. And I get a bit annoyed by that, because I've seen some really ugly crap, is how I'd put it. And if you want to brand them natural, I think you're actually going to hurt long-term the natural brand on a wine.
I think that there is a bit of a problem confusing clean with conventional.
Yeah.
A well-made wine from well-grown grapes can be very clean. You don't need to manipulate things. You don't need to use technology or chemistry to kind of clean a wine up. It can be clean.
Yeah.
But I sort of tend to agree with you that the nature of natural wine, no pun intended, being a bit faulty, that's I worry that consumers and people in the trade as well are being educated, or they're educating themselves that that's how it should taste, and that's not necessarily the right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had a Pinot a few weeks ago, and it had, to me, they were bragging about it being unfiltered on the label, and it looked like they'd actually added yeast back to the wine. There was so much.
It's very turbid.
Yeah, but it had got to the point where the yeast was scalping the wine and stripping colour.
Oh, okay.
There was that much. It was horrible.
Wow.
And yet most of the great Burgundies are unfiltered.
Well, exactly. Like Burgundy is a really interesting case in point where they're really, apart from very big producers, big relatively to Burgundy, manipulation is, they don't really need to. Like, it's all small production anyway. So
that's right. So I mean, are we going to use the word natural to say we've made a crappy wine and we're going to sell it as natural?
Yeah.
And I really think there are some great natural producers around. You know?
And there are plenty of producers who they don't want to be considered. They say, no, don't call me natural.
Yeah.
You look at my way of working and you might classify it as such. I don't want you to, because I don't want to be included in a category of wine that has a lot of, and poorly made wine.
I'm not necessarily big on the natural and biodynamic thing, but I think the biggest thing that has achieved, it's got people back into the vineyards. They're having to grow better grapes to get them through those processes of less additions and less SO2.
Yeah.
So I'm actually, as an advocate side of it, saying, we've got to grow better grapes. I think Australia in general has been on a downward spiral of grape growing where you pay the growers less, so he grows more grapes and maybe a bit less quality.
Yeah.
So they pay them less, and it happens over and over again. Rather than grapes being grown to be in the top wine and then pushed down through the scale of quality in the winery. Yeah. It's grown to be the bottom end, and it's up to the winemaker to try and push them up the scale in the winery. Yep. And I think that's almost over now, but it was a really disappointing factor, I think, in the 2000s to see that within our industry. I've always been noted, and Dave Bicknell and Steve used to say it to me at uni, that you're really cynical about the industry. And maybe because I grew up in a small winery focused fully on quality, growing good grapes, that's my base and that's what I believe in. And I even said during the research phases of our uni course that one day the wine industry won't even make a wine. You'll pick a vintage of a great wine you love, and you can type it into a machine, and all the chemicals will be put together to manufacture that wine. So you can even pick...
Sounds like something from Star Trek.
Well, we're getting there, though. I read about 3 weeks ago an article of a guy who's actually doing this now in America. So they're creating... So you could even say...
Terrifying.
Pick a grange from the mid-60s or a great vintage or your birth year or whatever, and type it in, and it will have the chemical breakdown of that wine in its computer, and it will just shove all the chemicals together and come up with recreate that wine for you today.
Holy cow. And I suppose that,
there's a few things
it does make sense. And
it's just happening. And it took 30 years, but it's on the way.
Okay, well.
And I was being cynical at the time when I first said it. So reality's now here.
Cynical, pragmatic. It's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And when you were studying at Roseworthy, this was sort of at a time where there was demand for winemakers. The Australian wine industry was really starting to take off. They were starting to export a lot more wine. Was it challenging for you, having come from that background, as you say, a small producer, a grower producer, to kind of have to separate yourself from that to learn about what, to a certain extent, would be commercial winemaking?
No, I think Roseworthy had a pretty good way of doing things then. Like, for me, going to uni isn't where you actually learn. they teach you how to learn.
Sure.
They teach you what you need to learn and what to look out for.
Sure.
And sure, we had some great lecturers, Pat Island being one of them, who really taught us a lot, but they also taught us to how to learn, what to listen to, and pick up tips from other people. And, I've been very fortunate in my life through Dad's connections of learning a lot from other winemakers, certainly Pat Carmody over here at Craiglee.
Sure.
An amazing man who makes fantastic wines. And then over in WA, David Gregg, John Durham, John Kozovich, old school winemakers who are very open with their knowledge. And then certainly in Burgundy when we go there, people sharing their little tidbits. And, it's not really secrets. We've all got different ways of doing things. And I believe there's no right or wrong. It's what you use to create your end product. There's no real right or wrong to get to that point.
Where was your first vintage, either during or post studies?
I worked during, the third year at Primo Estate in South Australia with, luckily, Joe Grilly, amazing man, who's made some awesome wines in his time, but his assistant winemaker at the time was Peter Godden. Very scientific base, an amazing guy as well. So I had the artist and the scientist working together, and it taught me so much, and just great people as well. So, and then after Roseworthy, luckily through my connections with Mosswood again, Keith Mugford was consulting to a place, Rosebrook in Margaret River, and got me the job there. My business management background had helped me get that job as well, because I had to be the winemaker and business manager there. So. Yeah, that was a good 3 years, and then over to Picardy to work with Dad and Mum.
So when did they establish Picardy?
They bought the land in 89 and started planting in 93, and I moved there in 96.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when was the first commercial vintage released?
96, which was Pinot only, and we made it, or did the ferments at Rosebrook, and we didn't have a winery ready at Picardy at the time, and then we moved, the winery was built during the year, and moved the barrels back to Picardy. At that point, earlier this year, we actually opened a Magnum of the 96, so first crop. Limited winemaking knowledge for that variety from that region, and it looked really good. Only 2 clones in that. We've now got 11 clones, so... Yeah, we were a bit surprised how good it still looked, being honest. I didn't think it'd hold up this long.
Was 96 a pretty solid vintage?
Yeah, it was good. It was a bit like the Burgundy. It's quite a structural vintage. So,
sure.
Yeah, it was one that will hold up.
Right. How involved were you in terms of the establishment of Picardy and planting of vineyards?
Oh, not a lot. Mum and Dad did the majority of it. I was over there the odd weekend, but not a hell of a lot in that stage. But... since I've been there, we've also probably planted another 30%, of which, ramming posts, running wires, do it all ourselves.
Fun stuff.
Yeah, certainly the way my father's brought us up is beginning to end, even laying the concrete in the cellar floor and,
sure.
Yeah, the whole lot. We've built a wall around the winery this year with the help of a friend who's a rock mason, a stone mason, and, it's 570 metres long limestone wall around the property, and done by us. So, a lot of work, but that's just the way we do things.
There are a few years from the sale of Mosswood to establishing Picardy. Was it something that they always intended to do? Was or establish something new?
Well, after they sold Mosswood, Dad and Mum bought shares in Domaine de la Pou store in Burgundy, and certainly that gave them a renewed passion, and Dad was more into Burgundy by that, or Pinot by that stage, rather than Cabernet, and renewed his passion. And then the shareholders in that actually set up Smithbrook with Dad as the managing director in Pemberton, and that sort of increased his sort of passion for it again. And then through Pooh Store and Becky Wasserman in Burgundy, they got to learn a lot more about all the new clones of Pinot and Chardonnay and production techniques and oak and a lot of things. And he sort of always he bought the land Picardy's on and planned to do just a little bit of his own as a retirement project. And I said to him, well, I'll come over and let's get into it and do it properly.
Okay, so there wasn't necessarily an expectation that you would come and help run the business?
No, not in the beginning.
Okay.
It was more just do a little toy vineyard for himself, 2 or 3 acres of Pinot just for his passion, yeah.
Back then, Pinot Noir wasn't anywhere near as popular as it is now. I think, even when I started working in the business in 2004, Pinot Noir still hadn't really taken off. It wasn't until like maybe 2008 that Pinot Noir really started to take things off. So there wouldn't have been a lot of references as far as Australian Pinot Noir for your parents.
No, there are a few good ones around. Certainly Mount Mary. Dad had done Mosswood, so he had his Pinot there as well. And,
yep.
Gioconda. Not Bannockburn as well. Certainly in WA there was a little guy, Carry View in Denmark, and Lefroy Brook in Pemberton. So there were bits and pieces around that showed the potential, I think, and did make some very good wines in the right years. Piero and Cullen also had Pinot back then. Whether the right Margaret River's the right region is always debatable, and I think in the cooler years has made some very good Pinots. I mean, the Mosswood 81 is still drinking very well. So, I think your passions move, and I'm also a big believer on palate transition. You start with your sweet white, your dry white, and then for some reason you jump from white to the biggest headache red you can find, and then you soften off back through reds and probably end up at Pinot. But I also then believe after Pinot you look for elegant complex reds, so Merlot, Sangiovese, Barbera, I believe, and Northern Rhone Shiraz probably, I believe that people are looking more into the elegant, finesse, complex wines now rather than just big. Yeah.
And Pemberton and Great Southern, these were parts of WA that weren't very well developed for viticulture. Were your parents kind of seeking out a Pinot region for WA? Possibly thinking Margaret River, maybe it's not the best place for Pinot Noir. Let's try and find somewhere else.
Definitely. And John Gladstone's and Olmo had sort of written up Pemberton as being cooler, more Burgundian style. As it works out, Gladstone's book Viticulture and Their Environment has a lot on it, and Burgundy, Pemberton and Mornington are all within plus or minus 1 heat day degree of Burgundy. So, it is the right region. The soils have turned out to be very good. There's sort of ironstone laterite soils that if you look around West St George, there's some stones very similar to what we've got. So,
having about 20 years experience in the business would have significantly helped in terms of picking the right sites and putting together how they were going to plant the vineyard. What sort of decisions were made about how to establish and then grow the Picardy vineyard?
Well, Dad was always an avid reader, and he's a very smart man. And you look at what he achieved at Mosswood from zero knowledge as such, and then Smithbrook and time at Pustor. The good thing about where we're at with Picardy is it was actually started with an end point in mind. So done with a lot of knowledge. I mean, it was the third winery I was involved in building. The third one Dad was involved. About the fourth vineyard Dad was involved with. The third vineyard I was involved with. We sort of always had a plan of where we'd end up. And so rather than just starting small and osmotically growing, we actually always knew the end point of how we wanted to design the place. So, it's been very good that way in that it's done with knowledge, not guesswork a bit.
Did you kind of, when you stepped into work with the family, was that sort of it, or did you have the opportunity over the years to kind of perhaps travel overseas, do a vintage here or there, that kind of thing?
I've done a lot of travel. I haven't had time to do vintages between Picardy and family and that. I've always been too busy. The most time I can ever really take away from the property is a week at a time. It's being small. There's so much hands-on, more office work nowadays running the business for me. But we're really lucky to have a guy who's been with us 10 years, John, who pretty much runs the vineyard and winery now. It's just full on. I'm probably 70% in the offices now, running the business.
Management.
Yeah, which thanks to bureaucracy gets worse and worse every year.
Yeah, it's a bit of red tape, isn't there?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the different clones that, because clones seem to be something that you're particularly interested in. So tell me about what's the importance of the clones that you use or have used at Picardy.
I mean, most of our clonal works with Pinot and Chardonnay, but I strongly believe that they can be a little bit simplistic on their own, and the Bordelais use different varieties to get the complexities into their wines. I think in the Burgundian varieties, you need your clonal variation to get the real complexity into them. For us, we certainly know the older 5 clones we've had. We've just got 6 new clones in. But they're all very different on their textures, flavour points on the palate, and flavour styles as well. So.
And as far as how you're working in the cellars, what sort of decisions do you make to, I guess, guide the really hard work, most of the work that's done in the vineyard, into what ends up in the bottle?
I suppose most of it, vineyard and winery management really has been more an evolution of things, and it's almost the bad years that make you learn. How to... You
have to work a bit harder.
Yeah, handle things a bit better. In the vineyard in 06, it was just wet and drizzly, and we let the cover crop keep growing and use up the soil moisture, and something we do every year now. So, trying to create smaller berries. I think in Pinot, skin to juice ratios is a huge thing. So you're really trying to push smaller berries in the vineyard, and then longer time on skins has probably been another thing. We trialled the very high SO2 regimes that some Burgundians use. Didn't really find it did anything good, so didn't go there. Just sitting on skins a bit longer in the fermenters, shifting from red sort of tart type fruit flavours through to more black fruit. Oak usage for us is huge. We work very closely with a Tonellerie Mariu from Burgundy. Very dry, clean, sweet, nutty oaks. They've been fantastic for us. Always trialling other oaks, and being honest, we're really struggling to find any oak that fits as well as that. We've got 2 other oaks we use alongside it, but if anything happened to Tonellerie Mariu, we're going to be really stuck. And that's why we're always trialling, just in case something does go wrong there. But we're very happy with that for our wine. It doesn't suit all wine. I think all winemakers have a different outlook on oak and what they're using it for and the flavours they want from it. So I think that's the main thing for us. And we're pretty hands off. Like the Pinot and Chardonnay are on yeast lees the whole 10 months in oak, and we don't rack much. And I like that secondary lees texture and flavour as well.
Something that you've done work on and you're quite passionate about, and it's something that obviously affects the entire industry, but Australia in particular in the past, is seals. And you're not a fan of screw caps?
No, it's not I'm not a fan. They just don't suit my wine. We've trialled them.
Okay.
And because we are reductive, it's on yeast lees the whole time in barrel, we find the screw cap really shuts our wine down.
Yeah.
We do need the oxygen ingress of cork. We've also run trials with Salitage years ago on the synthetics, and basically they started scalping the wine from 3 months, and so they certainly weren't anywhere near as good as cork for the rest of the trial. There's been promises for a very long time of oxidative screw caps, and certainly when they come out, I'll be revisiting that. And I do need that for my wine.
Mm-hmm.
All our trials have shown that. And the price point of cork now is quite high, and cost savings alone between the cork and capsule would be massive if I could go to screw cap.
Do you think the quality of the cork is better now than it was before screw cap sort of took over a lot
There's
more?
no doubt. Yeah, the screw caps have certainly given the cork producers a good kick in the arse. There's also other things behind it that a lot of people don't talk about. They were using a lot of chlorine-based chemicals in the forests, and in sterilising the corks and then the containers, and now, well, quite a long time ago, they realised that was the precursor for the TCA.
Yeah.
And so they've actually stopped using any chlorine in any of the production processes and growing processes in the forests. And when they realised that, they said it would be too tree skins off, and they worked out that that would come through in the mid 2000s, and I reckon about 04 onwards the cork has got a lot better. I'm not saying it's perfect yet. There's now another thing happening, which one of our suppliers is giving us corks that every cork is sniffed by a GCMS and guaranteed no taint. So it's
Also GCMS?
It's mass chromatography, so each cork gets electronically sniffed effectively
Whoa.
for TCA.
Okay.
So
interesting.
Yeah, when that comes through, well, we're now using that cork. We're pretty much guaranteed that it shouldn't happen. So hopefully that's the case, but it's not a cheap process either. So
one of the interesting things that I noticed when I visited a few years ago was that you're keeping the bottles upside down.
Yeah.
Is that how you store all of your wines, even in the cellar?
Yeah. I mean, I think there was some production faults with cork in that I think people played with low SO2. You cannot do that with cork. You've got an oxidative seal, and yet you're trying to use less or more oxidative techniques in the winery.
I find that kind of ironic with the natural wines, is they don't really like to use screw cap. They use natural
but
cork.
if you're going to be natural, I think you've got to use screw cap. I think it's a bit hypocritical if you go, for that reason you've got to use screw cap, but if you want to be natural, you've got to use cork to keep the natural thing. So there's that thing there. It makes it very difficult. The Burgundians, there's a lot of complaints about oxidation in white Burgundies.
90s white Burgundies,
And they played again a couple of years ago. They sort of go through waves where the white Burgundian producers, not all of them, but quite a few of them play with the low SO2s, and that shows up pretty quickly if you're using cork, I think. Whereas screw cap, you can go low SO2, and and that's where the benefits of that seal come from. But I think with cork, you got to be careful. You can't store it upright, otherwise you risk drying out the cork. You've got to keep it wet, either on its side or upside down. And I think that was a fault because a lot of people were storing them upright. I mean, I had guys saying, random oxidation of 70%. I'm sorry, that's not random.
That's not random at all.
That's shit winemaking.
Yeah. I mean, that's random oxidation in the way that the way the police pull you over to do a breath test. It's
I think cork's copped a lot of flack for other faults that have been introduced. I mean, someone told me of this huge number of corked bottles they got. Well, I've seen a lot of TCA in oak as well, and if you've got a really high percentage TCA, well, maybe that could be coming from the oak.
Yeah, I mean, when I was doing my studies, I heard about TCA coming from pallets. It is funny. Cork is sort of like that. It's that last thing, and so you kind of start with the most recent thing. It's like, it must be the cork. It's like, well, there's probably a lot of stuff before that could have gone wrong. That's caused the wine to be faulty. Yeah,
and I know it's not perfect, and like any management as well, you ameliorate your risks, and certainly when cork was crap, there was a couple of producers that had some pretty bad court cases against them for supplying bad cork, and yet people were still using those companies.
Yeah.
I dropped them very quickly, and I tried to use 2 or 3 different cork suppliers. So you had a different range of batches of cork. So if there was a problem batch, you still got some, but you got a lot less.
Yeah.
But certainly since the mid 2000s, where finding the cork quality so much better. And I'm sure there's still crap cork coming in, don't get me wrong. I think it's really working with the right suppliers to get it right and paying the money for the good cork.
Yeah, and a premium wine producer should be using a premium cork producer, a cork supplier.
Yeah, and, there's a lot of not premium cork suppliers around.
Do you still try and taste as extensively as you can, sort of getting references, particularly in terms of Burgundy?
Oh, yeah, we buy quite a bit of Burgundy. Luckily, we're in a position now where we can. I have to admit, though, my purchases of Burgundy in the last 12 to 18 months have slowed right down in that it's just becoming so expensive.
And there seems to be less of it as well.
Yeah, certainly they've had a few smaller vintages. And
the market for Burgundy around the world is totally different to how it was 15, 20 years ago.
For sure. And I think that's a shame in itself because there's a lot of passionate Burgundy drinkers who can now no longer afford it. And so Burgundy, a bit like Bordeaux did, might be going to people with money, not to people with passion.
Yeah.
And for my wine, I'd almost rather see it being drunk by people with passion. But on the other hand, it opens up for the good New World producers to fill that void, and hopefully we can be recognised as some very good Pinot Burgundian-esque producers.
The passionate but poorer customer will find alternatives, and whether it's in an alternative variety or region in France, for example, or whether it's an alternative country in terms of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, then I guess it encourages exploration and trying different things.
Yeah, and for me, because I am fussy with Pinot, it is hard to find the style I like, and also that's the thing is there's such a wide range of styles of Pinot. I'm more into elegant. I call them the sexy, silky ones. Finesse and complexity is my thing rather than bigness. And, if you want a Shiraz, drink a Shiraz. Don't find a Pinot that tastes like Shiraz. But that's my personal point of view. And there's some great producers. I mean, from over here, if I'm allowed to name names, I drink a lot of Hurley Vineyards from the Mornington and Timo Meyer.
Yep.
I think they're making some fantastic wines. But that's my style. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the other ones out there, but they're the two I love.
Absolutely. And I think that's the one of the best things you can do is to find the producer that you connect with, because vintage to vintage the wine might change, but the style hopefully will remain.
And I think with Pinot, that's a big thing, the vintage to vintage thing.
Absolutely.
But yeah, you're right. As long as you've still got the winemaker, the vineyards, you've still got what they offer with some variation. I think that makes it more interesting because, if you want a wine that tastes exactly the same every year, you go to the big producers because that's what they do well.
Yeah.
If you want something interesting every year, you look at the smaller producers for what they do.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, it has been fascinating chatting with you. I really do appreciate your time. If you'd like people to find out more information about Picardy, they can find that on websites.
Yeah, website, Facebook.
Yep.
It's probably the website's got the most information on it. Right?
Fantastic. And if you can spare the time, it is a lovely drive out to Pemberton. So, I don't know if you take visitors, but get in contact via the website and ask Dan if he's willing to welcome you.
Yeah, and if you keep an eye on Facebook, I put up when we're out doing things like Pinot Palooza on the weekend.
Yep.
Come to events we're at. But,
Get on the mailing list as well.
My marketing thing for Pemberton, especially to the Victorians, is come and get cold and wet somewhere else.
Well, thanks very much, Dan. I'm looking forward to catching up again soon.
No worries. Thanks, James.
And thank you for joining us on the first episode of the Vincast for 2018. I have been James Scaresbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and you can follow me on social media on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I'm at Intrepid Wino, and the podcast can be found on Twitter as well, at the Vincast. Intrepid Wino is the YouTube channel you should be checking out. Make sure you subscribe, check out some of the videos, leave a comment, share on social media, and like some of those videos. Lots of videos there, including 175 odd Let's Taste videos. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Player FM, Stitcher, Podbean, iHeartRadio, hopefully Spotify soon. Subscribing means you get the newest episode as soon as it becomes available. It's also a fantastic way to access every single episode of the show. And you can also leave a rating and review, which provides feedback not just to myself, but also potential listeners, and more importantly, past and potential guests of the show. So please take 5 minutes out and leave a rating and review, particularly on iTunes. It really does help the podcast grow. All the information there can be found on my website, intrepidwino.com. Different ways of getting in contact with me, as well as different writings I've done in the past. I'd love to hear from you. I really do appreciate you guys supporting and listening, and I'm very excited to have a lot of great episodes for 2018. But until then, bye.
Earbuds, Melbourne's podcast network. earbudsnetwork.com